I purchased this Kawasaki KD100 off of Craigslist for only around $300. As expected, the bike isn't perfect. It had undergone a mini restoration, but it had one main issue. It didn't want to be ridden. It could idle and rev all day, but once load was put on the engine, it died almost instantly. This problem eventually snowballed into a no-start issue. I've had friends and acquaintances ask me how I figure these things out, how I figure these problems, and I decided to document my process. Being that this bike is quite old, it is also very simple. These engines only need three things to run: air, fuel, and spark. With just one of these out of balance, the engine will fail to run completely. Knowing this, we can look at the different systems on the bike to help pinpoint exactly what the problem is. These are the items that I'll be looking at. The previous owner had said that the bike was stored with fuel for a little over a year, so carb cleaning is going to be the first thing that we will do. This is a manual that I will be using for the bike. It offers helpful diagrams, adjustment settings, and small details you would have trouble finding anywhere else. There's not really a dedicated forum for these bikes, so this will pretty much be my Bible going through this process. The first step to remove the carburetor is to remove the engine cover. It's only held on by 3 screws, but they are each at different lengths, so be sure to note where each one came from. Next we are going to remove the fuel line. Make sure that the petcock is set to off so fuel doesn't spill everywhere. We're going to make sure that the appropriate amount of fuel can be delivered to the carburetor, so we're going to be switching it to between the reserve and the on positions. This checks out to be fine. There is one bolt that mounts the carburetor under the case. This can be accessed by a small access hole in the front of the case. After that is removed, the carburetor can be slipped off. There is a small pin that holds the choke button onto the shaft. This is removed to make more space for installation later. The top of the carburetor simply screws off, and with it comes the main needle jet, the throttle plate, return spring, and throttle adjustment. Now that the carb is free, it's ready for disassembly. The float bowl is held in place by 4 screws, which are easily removed. It can't be seen well in the video, but there was some crustiness in the bottom of the float bowl, so it's a good thing we were doing the cleaning. The float is only held in by a pin. Remove the pin and the float can be easily removed. This looked fine and didn't have any problems. This is a very basic carburetor, so pretty much everything brass is removed. For cleaning, everything was put into boiling water with dish soap for about 10 minutes to loosen up any crud, and then sprayed out with carb cleaner. This carb wasn't that gunky, so all the orifices in the main body were simply sprayed out with carb cleaner rather than being dunked in the can of harsh carb cleaning solvents. This carb also had good gaskets from when it was last rebuilt, and I didn't want to ruin them. This carb is really simple, so reassembly is just the reverse of disassembly. There's really no fancy tricks here. Here we need to be careful with lining up the main needle jet into the main carb body so as to not damage it. The carb can now be slipped back into place. It is also helpful to lightly coerce it into its final position. After that, the screw can be tightened down. Make sure that it's tight and doesn't move. We don't want any air leaks here. Finally, the fuel line can be reattached. After putting the car back on the bike, I had tried to get it running, hoping that I had fixed the issue, and unfortunately this is where it decided it didn't want to start at all. I had tested spark before, and it was just fine. However, after a little bit of fiddling around with the bike, it no longer wanted to start, and after I had tested it for spark again, there wasn't any. Intermittent problems like this can be really difficult to solve, but not impossible. We had taken off the gas tank to reach the ignition coil. There was only 2 bolts holding this on, and are easily removed. There is only one bullet connector connecting the coil to the main harness that needs to be removed. We are removing the coil to check its resistance. This is an easy check that could be done on the bike if you really wanted to. The manual lists the specified ranges that the coil needs to have. Having a multimeter when working on older cars and bikes is a must. We're going to first check the resistance between the primary lead and the ground. This one turns out to be about 2.1, 2.2, within their specified range, so this checks out good. Next we're checking between the secondary and ground. This is about 9.64k ohms, which is also good. I next wanted to make sure there was nothing else causing any extra resistance in the circuit. Unfortunately, this cap that was on the original spark plug wire was about 5.4k ohms, which brings it well outside the specified range for the ignition coil. So this is what I believe which was causing the main issue with the spark. I had opted to buy a new spark plug boot and a new spark plug spring. This is a different system than what was on it before. However, it won't bring any extra resistance into the circuit. To start this process, we're going to strip back the rubber on the spark plug wire. We're going to make sure that the spring fits nicely over the new spark plug. Now that we know that the spring fits nicely over the spark plug, we can install it. To install the spring, the ends of the spring are stabbed into the coil wire, with the exposed plug spread out and now contacting the spring. The boot is then just slipped over the spring and wire. This was probably the hardest part of the whole process, and I wasn't able to get any film of it because I was struggling. Installing the coil is simply the reverse of taking it apart. We're just going to tighten up the 2 bolts on top and then plug the wire back in. We can now test for spark by grounding the spark plug to the head of the engine, and then turning the engine over by hand. Here we can see that the problem was with the spark plug cap, as we now have spark. All we have left to do is to reinstall the engine cover. I listed previously that I was going to check the points on this bike. However, the points are under the flywheel, and I don't have the special tool to get to them yet. Since the bike was running before, I really don't think the points are a problem on this bike. Now that everything is back together, we can go ahead and try and start the bike. My backyard isn't really suitable for riding around on a dirt bike, so I'm not going to show me struggling with that. But the bike can now actually be ridden around. When I tell people that I like to work on old cars and bikes, people look at me as if I'm a magician and have secret knowledge on how these things work. Sure, you would not have found this issue on a forum, but that really takes all the fun out of it if you don't do all the problem solving yourself. I have a couple other projects laying around the house, so I'll probably do some more films on that. Thanks for watching.